Thousands of people fall victim to FWP.
I'm so cold.
Starving.
Nobody cares about me.
Also known as first world problems.
I'm so cold. Somebody set the AC to 72. I need it at 73.
Starving. How has leftovers.
Nobody cares about me. Nobody commented or liked my status.
Hi, I'm right here. And for just 5 hours of attention a day, you could help somebody with FWP.
Everyone keeps putting so much pressure on me. I don't know what I want for my birthday.
I have too much chips for my dip. But if I open a new dip, I'll have too much dip for my chips.
Why does Apple keep making new iPhones? Now I have to get another one? They've been through so much struggle.
The remote's over there. But I'm all the way over here.
So much hardship.
My iPhone 5 is too big for my skinny jeans.
So much attention.
I poured my cereal without checking to see if we had milk. We did.
So please, show your support and send them this video. And show them how much we care about their FWPs.
I bought too many groceries. Now I have to make 2 trips.
All you have to do is call the URL, 1-800.org, and we'll send you the FWP helping kit, which includes a bridge, a straw, and a full cup with a cover. Here's a bridge. Now get over it. Here's a straw. Now suck it up. Here's a full cup. Now shut the full cup. With your help, we can put an end to FWPs and focus on the real problems, like starving children or homeless people. Because if you're complaining about something as silly as the iPhone 5, just wait till you see the iPhone 6. Oh, this is the iPhone 5S. This is the iPhone 6.
Before we go into the panel, I want to talk to you about my own experience about 12 years ago when I had started a fair trade company as a venture capitalist. And 2 years down the line, I realized that the company was able to create impact. It was able to have a good cash flow. The communities were getting returns. But when we went to the communities and tried understanding that, are they really able to move forward from where they were? Is this additional amount of income really helping them? And the answer was a resounding no. So that made me really think that what are the challenges which they are facing beyond the space where this impact investment company was helping them. And the point was that there were far too many what I would call leakages in the system. The kind of challenges the communities faced, not just from the income end, not from the investment end, but also from what kind of support they were getting from the local government, what kind of support they were getting from the philanthropic organizations around them, and what kind of capacity they were able to build of themselves as an enterprise. That moved me, and that journey has been in the last 12 years, moved me to look about how do we bring together social innovation with strong investor base, with a responsible and engaged local government and a national government, and how do we catalyze innovations. That journey, ladies and gentlemen, has also brought me to this stage today. So this panel is going to talk about some of those issues. It will be looking at how can social innovations which have received little popular attention can be scaled and replicated. It would be debating about how local and national governments, and indeed regional ones, can be engaged in catalyzing those spaces. And it would also be looking at what is it which the policymakers would need to be able to formulate something which really helps and supports this sector. We have an illustrious panel today with us, and I would like to introduce you to the panel. The panel comprises of thought leaders, policymakers, and people who have really done a lot of work in this space. To start with, I would like to introduce Rosemary Addis. Rosemary works for the Employment and Workplace Relations with the Australian government and the Department of Education. And she's got a very exciting role where there is an intersection of government, community, and markets. And she delivers high-value propositions, innovation, and problem-solving within that space. So Rosemary has been known for pioneering thought leadership and successfully delivery of initiatives including Impact Australia Report and founding Australia's first social enterprise fund. There is a lot to be said over here, and I think there will be a space for Rosemary to reflect a lot more about the work she does. The other eminent panelist we have is Gerry Higgins, the CEO of Community Enterprise in Scotland. Gerry is also a director of Social Value Lab, and he brings over 30 years of experience in developing and running social enterprises and works with the government agencies and the third sector partners in the UK and internationally to support policies and practices. Welcome, Gerry. The fourth panelist we have is Lisa Dekene. Lisa is the president of the Institute of Social Entrepreneurship in Asia, and she's an avid supporter of social entrepreneurship and enterprises. Most recently, she has been engaged in a proposed legislative measure in Philippines called the Poverty Reduction through Social Empowerment Entrepreneurship Act. And ISE has been instrumental in engaging with the government in Philippines and in Asia on some of the thought leadership within social entrepreneurship. Thank you, Lisa. And finally, last but certainly not the least, we have Penny Lowe. She's the founder of the Social Innovation Park, and Penny wears multiple hats. She has been part of this of the Social Innovation Park global movement. She's also a veteran member of Parliament, and she's a union advisor and sits on many national and international committees. More recently, Penny has been engaged with the World Economic Forum process, and she is coming out of Myanmar after attending the World Economic Forum. So thank you, Penny, and welcome. So with that, I would want to talk a bit about some of the trends which I have personally been looking at, and then I would be requesting the panelists to reflect on their own experiences. So I want to talk about three core trends which I have seen in my own experience. The first one is when we are looking at social innovation, there is a pioneering gap. We have most of the work around pioneers is largely happening in the social sector space or with the local government. But as these pioneering efforts move into a space which is actually measuring impact and returns, there is still a big gap between where the investors are and where the pioneers in the social movement spaces are. And there is a need to really look at what kind of social innovations are required to make that space bigger and make that space move in the direction where we see greater innovations happening. The second trend which I would like to talk about is the need to localize impact. There is increasingly our experiences of social enterprises and the work with the community is talking about the greater need to engage with their local policymakers and the local government. Though across Asia, there are multiple countries where there have been decentralization processes and laws being passed, but for that to convert into a very effective space, there is a lot more which needs to be done. And I think that's again critical for this gathering to really realize and see how that innovation space reaches out to the local government and to the communities. And finally, the third issue which I want to talk about is from the last month till the next year, there are 6 countries in Asia which are going to have elections. The reality of this space around innovation is that the underlying factor is also political momentum and the way the political parties and the government engages. Is there a message for all of us in that space? How well do we engage with the political momentum which gets generated to make things happen? So with those thoughts, I would hand it over to the panelists and would request them to reflect on some of these questions which have been posed, but also to pose a few questions to all of you, given that you all come with a vast amount of experience yourself. Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Gerry Higgins. My context is that I run a social enterprise We employ 60 people. We're based in Scotland. I've been doing social enterprise for nearly 30 years, well before it was fashionable. I'm one of the social enterprise movement leaders in the UK, and I describe myself as a policy influencer, located in possibly the most supportive and enabling policy environment or ecosystem in the world. 15 years ago, we had a hostile policy environment in the UK. Many social enterprise businesses were blocked from tendering for contracts due to lack of understanding. Business was business, social was social. Tenders from social enterprises for delivery of public sector services went in the bin. So with low awareness amongst the public, with no significant political engagement, it meant that the early part of my social enterprise journey was frustrating, challenging, and often unproductive. A number of social enterprise leaders commenced collaboration to start a coalition to lobby for change in the late 1990s. That coincided in a new government in 2000 interested in change. We brought government ministers and officials on buses to see social enterprises. We sat down together and wrote the first social enterprise strategy in the UK in 2001. And since that time, very significant progress has been made in growing the number, the scale, and the scope of social enterprises and establishing supportive policies and initiatives. These deal with business support, opening markets, social investment, developing leadership, asset ownership, and public awareness. My own current context is that I work in Scotland, which has its own parliament, devolved powers, and its own social enterprise strategies. We work with our government to support social enterprise, and government recognises that to fulfil its longer-term objectives of having a healthier, fairer, wealthier, greener country, communities need to have strong social enterprises. Our work supports that long-term objective, and this is a partnership. I need to bring the policy to life by describing the impact of just a few of our UK policies. I mentioned at the start that access to public sector contracts was one of the biggest barriers 10 years ago. Well, we've seen huge change in this area. By working with local and national governments, we have completely changed this environment. Most of our large public contracts now have community benefit clauses that oblige contractors to describe how they're going to engage and create benefit, for instance, by employing young people, by creating training opportunities for young people, or by creating apprenticeships, by engaging social enterprises in the supply chain. Our Olympics had social enterprise community benefit clauses in the construction phase. Our Commonwealth Games, which are going to take place in Glasgow in 2014, has social enterprise community benefit clauses, which meant that when the Games Village was being built, a social enterprise employing people with disabilities was doing the catering for 400 workers, 6 days a week for 3 years. We collaborated with colleagues in Canada, where their construction of the 2015 Pan Am Games facilities and the $47 billion light rail system in Toronto has supply chain opportunities for social enterprises and employment opportunities for young people. We share with our colleagues in Canada systems, materials, cases, and approaches so that we're more effective together. In a period where public sector spending is under pressure, we recognise that many social enterprises specialise in preventing social exclusion. We're brokering collaboration between public sector agencies and social enterprises through public-social partnerships, where the focus is on outcomes. What do we want to see in the future? What actions are needed so that service interventions focus on the outcomes, not on the process? We co-design services with our public authorities to produce better results. We recognise that, for instance, in services to reduce reoffending, people leaving prison, that intensive support can often be very cost-effective and worthwhile, because there's a very high cost if people end up back in prison. So we work to co-design these services, bringing social enterprises and the public sector agencies together. It's a new type of dialogue around focusing on the outcomes and collaborative commissioning. Our work in this area is not a temporary initiative. 2 laws have been introduced in London and Edinburgh parliaments on sustainable procurement. And this says to government officials in local government and in national government that procurement based on lowest cost is no longer acceptable. Social value needs to be considered as now that this is in law, this is here for the long term. One of the challenges to inclusion in the UK is that too much land is owned by too few people. As part of land reform measures introduced by government, we have a community right to buy policy, and here's how it works. In rural areas, if an individual or a business wants to sell an asset, a piece of land, a building, where the local community recognises that this has a strategic importance to the community, either in the functioning of the community or its well-being, there's a mechanism of putting a compulsory stop to that sale. The community has a referendum in which over 50% of the people need to turn out, and over 75% of the people need to vote in favour of the community acquiring the asset. It then has 6 months to raise the finance to acquire this asset. This has resulted in a discontinued bank in a small town now being a community centre, a cafe, and a small business centre, instead of being sold for apartments, as was the original intention. A community has purchased a large area of woodland, which was to be commercially sold, but is now part of community leisure and tourism resource and part commercial to generate revenues for the community. Perhaps the best example is in the Isle of Gia in the west of Scotland, where an international landlord put the island up for sale. The community raised the funds for buyout, and the population are now adapting to the fact that their challenges and their issues and their problems are not in somebody else's control. They own the island, the solutions are in the community. Centuries of population decline has been reversed, tourism has been significantly boosted, the school roll is up, the average age on the island is down and population is up. The reason I mention this is that from a government policy, communities have been empowered, there's greater optimism, and well-being has been enhanced. And this is the part of policy that interests and that energises me. Our policies are now needing to be simplified, our community right to buy policies are now needing to be simplified, to be rolled out more widely. But it does signify the ability of progressive policy to change lives. One of the phenomena in the last decade has been the growth in renewable energy. Now, in my part of the world, the sun doesn't shine as much as it does here. It's often cold, frequently rainy, and usually windy. That's good for our wind turbines and our wind farms. However, because of policy, when developers now want to erect wind turbines, we have an enhanced community benefit policy across the UK. It isn't acceptable for developers to create wind farms without arrangements to benefit local communities. In many countries that I work in, there's a continuing trend of migration from rural areas to urban centres, particularly of young people seeking opportunities. This is often really dangerous for the fabric of communities. One of the most effective strategies that we have been involved in is introducing community benefit, working in the space between developers and communities to plan at very early stage how community benefit is going to be realised. This is supporting communities to plan for what they will do with wind farm revenue, to introduce finance models to enable communities to have their own wind farms or a larger share of commercial developments. We're now seeing the benefits of that policy in communities that are using this revenue, which is generally over a space of 25 years, to ensure that community facilities are good quality, that local businesses are supported, that there are opportunities both in jobs and leisure for young people. Developers, generally speaking, are now treating the community benefit as something which is not just necessary, but actually valuable for the whole of society as the impact in communities is realised. When we started developing our social enterprise movement 10 or 15 years ago, we recognised the value of collaboration to improve our social innovation as well as to assist others. The British Council has been resourced to do pioneering high-quality work supporting social enterprise and developing social capital in East Asia. In CEIS, my own organisation, we've been supported to host the Social Enterprise World Forum, which commenced in Edinburgh in 2008, and after Melbourne, San Francisco, Johannesburg, Rio, this October will be in Calgary in Canada, and next year in Seoul in South Korea. One of the common themes at the forum, and the thought that I'm going to finish on, is that social enterprise leaders and intermediaries cannot leave policy making to policymakers. The best policy is that that's informed and shaped by the people it affects. Our UK experience has been challenging, has been fast-paced, but for us in social enterprise, it's been rewarding and it's been positive. Good luck with your adventures.
I sometimes joke with people that I'm something of an accidental bureaucrat, and a few weeks ago I was saying that and somebody said to me, well, that's a very big accident. It's actually a very long story and I won't bore you with it now, but I do want to pick up the more serious note that my experience of working in government is one where people take very seriously the role of public service at very different levels and from their different vantage points. I've not yet met anybody who works for government who isn't there because at some level they want to be making a difference to the communities in which they work. And so I want to pick up on that in looking at some of the themes that we've been exploring here today, and also use some examples from our work to illustrate the way that this can be approached to enhance and scale some of the most promising social innovations. And as Gerry said, this takes all of us to work together. The kinds of issues that we're trying to address, the kinds of innovations that we're trying to stimulate, actually go beyond the capabilities and resources of any one sector alone. They work best at the centre of governments, communities and markets, and that means we need to work better together. Professor Yunus this morning talked about problem-solving business solutions. Policy and programs are also centred around problem-solving. Many times that I've walked into meetings with people in government, and the first thing that people trying to come to grips with a new approach will ask is, what's your problem definition? And so one of the takeaways that I would give to all of you is being really sharp about the problem definition that helps to find the ways in which government can engage, and that you can find ways to engage with the policy around the issues that matter, is one really good way to stimulate conversations with colleagues in government. Also, one of the clear problems that we have internationally is that the demand and need for services far outstrips the resources, particularly the resources of governments alone. And so this is one of the reasons that government really has a role in this space, because helping to stimulate the kind of approaches and investment that will help us to reach that need and that will help communities to find solutions within themselves is part of the role that government can play. Another thing that we've talked about today and was mentioned in this morning's session is about the toolbox. And I think it's really important that we see government as having a much broader toolbox than some of the things that we most typically think about first, like regulation and funding. They're really important, absolutely they are, but government has a much broader toolbox, and one that, if you can find ways to collaborate, can actually be really beneficial for everybody. So I'm thinking of things like acting as a convener. One of the really good things about when you work in government is if you call a meeting, most of the time people will come. Use that in your governments. Go to the people who care about this stuff and ask them to help you bring people together. They can do that, and where there's a willingness to see these movements evolve, they will do that. And it doesn't cost anything. That signalling from government, the convening power, the facilitating, the enabling, the calling out the champions and the people who are doing great work is a real value add, and it's not one that has to start with a conversation about money. Additionally, governments can act as a catalyst, and sometimes just doing small things can help to catalyse the market. A third point I want to talk about is scale and systems. Working in federal government, you have to take a helicopter view. You have to look at all of the communities, and so this issue about how we take things that work in one community and help to get that benefit more broadly in communities that need it, and help those communities find what's working elsewhere, help the people who know where the need is find the people who've got the resources to contribute, is something that we think about a lot. One of the things I think is key to this is us all getting better at finding in innovations that work and in enterprises that are delivering great value in their communities, how do we identify those things which are the success factors that can translate to other communities and not lose that when we look at replication and scale, but also not impose a cookie-cutter approach in different communities. We need to be able to work with the assets and the leadership that's there in communities, and all communities, however much they might be experiencing disadvantage, have assets to build on. How do we start from where they are in an engagement and bring the best of what works to that? Also, when we look at scale, I think there are lots of parallels to be drawn from some other policy areas. And one of the great things about social innovation is I think it enables us to go beyond some of the limitations that come with looking through a frame of economic innovation or social capital. But it's well accepted in policy circles in a lot of parts of the world that if you want to stimulate economic innovation, that government taking a role in helping to set up the infrastructure, as well as making some targeted investments that will help to bring in private capital, that will help to build value, is an appropriate role for government to play. In fact, the OECD survey in 2012 of access to capital for small and medium enterprises actually said that 25 OECD countries have increased their investments and activity in these areas in the last 5 years. One of the limitations of economic innovation policy is that it mainly focuses on value creation within firms and then relies on spillover effects for social benefit. Now, in a lot of countries that's been successful policy. My question is, why not take that a step further and promote that in at least some areas we should be intentionally seeking to have that social value as part of the policy platform, that actually we're taking some of those policy principles we accept already and we're saying let's just play on a bigger canvas and expressly seek to have those benefits for society, much in the way that Wayne was talking this morning about having part of the portfolio to try and reduce the volatility. I'd also like to give a nod to my colleagues who run the International Impact Investment Policy Collaborative and some of the work that they've done and that Ted Jackson has done out of Canada that's really looked at how do we take the best of enterprise and policy internationally and help it work in other jurisdictions. And I think there's 3 or 4 points that are really helpful to think about. First of all, we have to acknowledge that our contexts are different. And so we need to look at what are the differences and how would we actually work to those. There's also technical diversity. So some of the levers are different in our systems and our policies. How do we work with that to build the right collaborations? Thirdly, reciprocity and networks are absolutely vital. We need to all be learning fast about what works and then share that knowledge with others and build the networks that help to transfer that knowledge and to accelerate change. We all need champions. We need to find the champions in our own systems, including in government, who can help to promote this work. And we have to accept that there are going to be asynchronous opportunities. We won't get to plan it all out perfectly. Sometimes, and particularly in government and policy, you can have all the ducks lined up, but it's actually a wormhole of sorts over here that opens up and you've got an opportunity and you just have to be prepared to jump through it and work out how to do it after that. I'm going to talk just very briefly about a few aspects of our work to illustrate this. I'm not going to dwell on them, but really happy to talk to you afterwards. As you heard from Amit, we led work to seed fund Australia's first social enterprise funds. There we used government grant funding as catalytic investment. We made grant funding available to be the first loss capital for those funds and to bring other investors into the table. We also used an outcomes-based approach to help fund managers tell us how they would do that and enable diversity in the market from the start. We looked around the world at what's been happening in community investment and took the best of that learning and said, how could that work in Australia? Everywhere in the world, people are good, and Australians are particularly good at saying that's all very interesting, but it'd never work here. We wanted to overcome some of those issues by demonstrating how we thought the best of that work could work for the Australian community. And we also wanted people to see it wasn't just government trying to transfer costs and risks, and we teamed up with one of the leading banks, an investment house, and one of the large community organisations to say we all think this is an important part of the conversation in Australia. And rather than talk in the language of underserved communities, we talked about place-based investment approaches. We've also tried to expand the toolbox into other areas that get used in innovation, like incubation. And we've actually led an incubation from within government to work with people from community and experts from around the world on how we would build a model for transformational change in communities that are suffering the most disadvantage. It's a model that goes from 0 to 24, is entirely place-based and looks at changing the whole system over a generation. We've spun that out into an NGO so that it can have much greater independence than going with that political cycle that Amit referred to. And it's in its early stages of work in the first community with a new collective funding model to underpin it, which is in its very early stages as well. And finally, our most recent public work has been launching Impact Australia, which Amit referred to. We saw a gap in the market in Australia for a foundation document that actually spoke to what was happening in impact investment, why it was important, how does it link to what's happening in the rest of the world, and perhaps more importantly, what can and should we do about that, not just within Australia, but joining up from Australia with the rest of Asia and more globally. We used that report to create a conversation in Australia about these issues and try to galvanise action, and we were lucky to have Jed Emerson come out and run a roadshow with us. And I think for a government document, we're in our second, nearly about to go into our third print run. And so to us, that demonstrates the value in doing that kind of work, even from a non-traditional platform like government. So I guess the message I want to leave you with is just that one of value, that this is about value creation, about finding the people that you can work, and when you come to policymakers, being able to talk with them and find that ground of what can we do. There's always going to be lots of things we can't do, but what can we do? Thank you.
I'd like to share with you a developing country perspective to the discussion. And as Amit was pointing out, the Institute for Social Entrepreneurship in Asia led the research and the stakeholders' consultations that resulted to the creation of the poverty reduction through social entrepreneurship, the coalition itself, and the coalition pushed a bill that is now pending in Congress called the Poverty Reduction Through Social Entrepreneurship Bill, which we hope to be an act. I'd like to share some of the key areas of social innovation that we tried to incorporate in the legislative measure now pending in Congress, and the challenges that we are facing in pushing it. Maybe I can focus on four main ideas on social innovations that have not received popular attention, but have a substantial promise for generating impact on poverty reduction and resolving inequality, particularly given that in developing countries like the Philippines, there's the paradox of economic growth, which is not redounding to the benefit of the poor, and where poverty is not being reduced and inequality is being exacerbated. In a sense, we face an environment that's more hostile than in developed countries, because we face, I think, more wholesale failures in our state and market institutions in delivering services to the poor. The first idea I would like to put forward is support for social enterprises as vehicles not only for wealth creation, but for wealth distribution. As early as 2004, we actually came out with an action research that defined social enterprises as having a distributive enterprise philosophy, and that social enterprises consider wages and payments to the poor not only as costs to be minimized and wages, not only as costs to be minimized, but benefits to be optimized. Recently, I was involved in a process of doing a social return on investment study with one of the social enterprises in the Philippines called Gandang Kalikasan. which actually markets personal care products under the brand name of Human Nature. This social enterprise pays its workers not only a minimum wage, but a living wage. They pay, at the time that the minimum wage is 450, they're paying 750. And they have embarked on efforts of giving back 100% of their profits of some of their best products. For example, the bug spray, citronella bug spray. They're giving 100% back, 100% of their profits back to the communities that are actually providing citronella. And this is being used not only to expand their farms, but to actually build their capital to own the processing plant of citronella oil so that they can benefit in the long term more from the partnership with the social enterprise. So the second idea that I'd like to pose is the importance of transformational partnerships with the poor to assist them get out of poverty. Amit was talking about the frustration of fair trade organizations, having a good bottom line and having increased the incomes of the poor. But in effect, if you look at the impact in terms of whether they were moved out of poverty, then the impact in terms of poverty reduction has not been good. I did my PhD thesis on looking at how social enterprises engage the poor and address poverty. And in the PhD thesis that I completed in 2012, one of the main points, one of the main conclusions of that thesis was that for us to get the poor out of poverty, we need to engage them not just in a transactional way, as workers, as suppliers, as clients, but in a transformational way, meaning to say we need to organize them, we need to build their capability in order that they are able to become actors in their own development. A fair trade organization that exhibits this in the Philippines is Alter Trade. Alter Trade not only assisted landless, powerless sugar workers turned agrarian reform beneficiaries to become partner suppliers of Alter Trade for Muscovado sugar for export to Europe, to Japan, and all that, but they also help these communities to become, to organize themselves, to develop community development plans, and for these communities to actually pursue those plans, providing potable water for the community, engaging government to build a street, etc., etc. So that these supplier communities are actually not just organized as suppliers to Alter Trade, but are actually actors in their own poverty development and their community development processes. The third idea I'd like to put forward is the power of pro-poor value chain development in strategic economic subsectors. Strategic economic subsectors are those that have the potential for growth, but where the poor are concentrated. Just to illustrate, in the Philippines, 50% of coconut farmers are living below the poverty line. When we made a study, one of the members of the Institute for Social Entrepreneurship in Asia made a study about the potential of the coconut husk subsector alone. To the development, the full development of that can actually create 3 million jobs. So that it's not a matter of having no opportunities. I think it's just that the investments are not going to these strategic economic subsectors where there is potential for growth and where the poor are concentrated and could be major players. The last point I'd like to share with you are some of the incentives and support programs that the social enterprise sector in the Philippines have put together in the Poverty Reduction through Social Entrepreneurship Bill. One of them is the use of the power of public procurement, as Gerry was pointing out. A second is the setting up of credit windows that provide non-collateralized loans with a guarantee fund pool. And the third is a comprehensive insurance system to mitigate risks faced by social enterprises and the poor. All these are incorporated in the Poverty Reduction through Social Entrepreneurship Bill that the coalition, the Poverty Reduction through Social Entrepreneurship Coalition, is pushing. We filed the bill, or we were able to get champions for the bill in Congress last year, but we just had elections. And right now, we're faced with a dilemma that some of the champions are actually out of power. So, but let me just say two things before I finish. The main challenge that we've faced in pushing this favorable policy environment, or what we believe is a favorable policy environment for social enterprises to flourish, is still the mindset of government and policymakers, the need for a paradigm shift. And I think this change of mindsets have to do with looking at the poor as transformational partners, no? Looking at some of the issues that I've discussed already. But related to the challenge of changing mindsets among government and policymakers is actually a weakness on the part of the social enterprise sector. No? The social enterprise sector in the Philippines, and I would say in Asia, no, is several years behind, I think, the social enterprise sector in Scotland. We are still in a process of, I would say, asserting ourselves as a sector and actually developing our agenda as a sector to develop and grow, no? In order for us to have a stronger voice, to more effectively engage government and also impact investors. And just as a last point, I'm being prompted to finish, maybe an important question that I'd like to pose with you, because a lot of you are impact investors, is what role could impact investors play to better assist this process of articulation, this process of consolidation of the social enterprise sector in Asia, to better engage government, to better engage you? Because I think even if you're engaging social enterprises as clients or as partners individually, there's a need for the social enterprise sector to consolidate itself, to be able to dialogue with you more effectively. And so this question of what role could you play in helping us to consolidate ourselves, to articulate ourselves better, so that we could co-create social innovation spaces to significantly reduce poverty and inequality in Asia, is, I think, the challenge I'd like to pose before I leave this podium. Thank you.
I'll be speaking from where I am, in great part because of my Myanmar's belly at the moment. It's not doing me a lot of good. But I want to, well, first of all, thank Doreen and her team for inviting all of us here to the Impact Forum. It is indeed extremely apt that the forum should also have the word inclusiveness as a core. Because indeed, if I take stock of where social innovation or social enterprise is, today we are really talking about inclusivity in society and social innovation and social enterprise as a vehicle to reach them. So I thought it would be apt for me to take stock of where we are now. And I'll do so by a very quick historical perspective from my own perspective. So this is not studied or anything like that, but it's just from my personal observation. So I think, a long time ago when we first talked about social enterprise, it was really a very ad hoc term that some people who are doing it don't even know that that's social enterprise, and those who are not doing it thinks that that's social enterprise. And it began, really as an awareness amongst a few educated, more enlightened individual and NGO who saw the gaps that markets or traditional charities could not meet. And therefore they thought, why not empower the people with a sense of dignity and self-worth through meeting of double bottom lines. And I think that was generally the first phase. And they serve mainly the rural developmental areas and the urban underserved, usually, in the inner cities. And then things moved, and we realized sometime in the early 90s or so that the world has in fact become more and more affluent. And at one point in time, just before the financial crisis, the world was at a point where it was wealthier than ever. It has access to ICT, which is infocom technology, in a really affordable manner. And all of a sudden, there was a democratization of information, and the world opens up. As, what was his name now? Who said that the world became flatter. Who was it? Friedman, that's right. Tom Friedman says the world became flatter. And as the world became flatter, people were beginning to see and wonder, why is it that the world that is far more affluent than before, a world that is a lot more accessible than before, there are still people who are suffering from poverty, and there are still people who are hungry. Something doesn't seem to be right. So more people then begin to think that perhaps they could volunteer their time or even start a social enterprise. And of course, many of the people from the financial sector also began to look into things like social bond and social capital formations. That trend continued for a little while. And even at that point in time, although the concept of social enterprise became clearer, it was still somewhat fuzzy. And but there was the beginning of educational institutions adopting social enterprise as a module or even a department. And I think Harvard Business School was one of the first to start a full department on social enterprise. Of course, Stanford was the other one that really led the way. So it became the beginning of institutionalization of social enterprise. And then came the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, and all of a sudden, there is a rethink of what growth should be. Should it be, the growth for growth's sake, where it's all about economic and financial growth? Can we continue to measure a person's worth just by their net worth and how much money they receive at the end of a month or a year? Can we just be happy that, corporates are taking in a lot of profits, but churning out a lot of externalities, but we value them via their PE ratio alone? And can countries be considered top of the world when their GDP is the highest? So I think a series of questions begin to pop up when the financial crisis hit Wall Street and melted various lands, Iceland's included. And at that point in time, Iceland was, in fact, the country with one of the highest GDP per capita. And with that, the government became under a lot of pressure to look into inclusive growth and what that means. And as the world began to recover from the financial crisis, there was a piece of observation written by Tom Wolfe in, I think it was Time magazine, that said that as the world became more affluent, it is strange that as citizens became wealthier, the demands of citizens also increases, and therefore the pressure on social services, of course it means treasury, also increases. And I think we saw quite a lot of thinking around how then do government and cities, in particular, meaning urban cities, can, in the longer term, cope with some of this burgeoning social issue and social challenges. In the case of Singapore, we all know that we have falling fertility rate and a fast aging demography, and all of these means that we have to very quickly decide on what are some of the social policies that can be implemented today so that we can build a much more self-reliant society. These are real issues that I think any responsible government will need to address. So with that, what we are also seeing is that the concept of social enterprise got expanded to that of social innovation. And it requires a much more structured and systematic approach. That means it can no longer be the works of a few enlightened individuals, but it has to go onto the platform where the private sector can engage. The public sector provides the policy framework to address it. I saw a flashcard that says 2 minutes left, so I'll attempt to summarize that what I think we would need to do therefore at this point in time is to address some of these gaps through the establishments of more networks, different types of networks, whether it is policymakers networks or policy executors networks that addresses social entrepreneurship and social innovation, but also try to put ourselves into a positive momentum, align with the government, those who are still in office, and even those policymakers who might not be in office any longer, to try to align with them, empower them, and move forward on the social innovation agenda. And to summarize very quickly, I think there are 6 main areas, and I'll only give the headlines since we're running out of time. There are 6 main areas that I think government can do, and my question to you and my challenge to you then is, which of these areas would you align yourself with, and can you help in? So the 6 areas would be, first, I think these are the 6 policy drivers of social innovation that, in fact, the Schwab Foundation has found, and I very much, agree with some of these findings. So the first is engaged market stakeholders. This means how do we identify and align external stakeholders and resources so that social entrepreneurs can tap on them. Second is develop government capacity for action, and this means aligning internal resources. So how do we encourage government to align their internal resources so that they can address and encourage the growth of social enterprise? The third is to build market infrastructure and capacity, and that basically means how do we help them to build networks and value chain approach to social enterprise? And fourth, how do we prepare enterprises for growth? And this refers to procurement policies, which Gerry mentioned. In the UK, they have the social value bill. I think that was proposed by Chris White last year. And also, how do we also help to change some of these procurement policy of governments or government agencies and even corporate agencies. And then, of course, capacity development for social enterprise. And the fifth is how do we encourage government to grow and direct capital? Should we do it through incentives or negative taxes? In the case of Singapore, we know that if you donate to a charity with IPC status, you get a 250% tax incentives. Can we extend the same to social enterprises which are not registered as charities? And the sixth, of course, is we have to continually push, encourage, and align ourselves with the government in terms of refining and reviewing the policies, because nothing is static, it's the ongoing process. So, again, my challenge to you is, where can you help in this process itself? Thank you.
Thank you. So we have heard quite a bit about the way governments are engaging right across the world. We've also heard about some of the bills which have been moving. And also, I think the panelists have posed some challenges or issues they are facing. So we have some time now for taking questions or your own reflections.
You talked about including the community in exits, and I find that a challenging conversation for investors, but I find it really a good one. I wonder, that would be an interesting one, especially for the government to be involved in, I think. In some of the businesses I'm engaged in, rural Africans get solar panels and we get rich, and we're starting to sort of wonder about that exchange, and that it's not extractive. We're taking out kerosene and lives are changed, but all the wealth is in the hands of the investors and not. And Morgan Simon, who founded, was the CEO of Tonic, has got these transformative finance principles that said don't be extractive, and I think. A lot of impact investing is doing good, but really not sharing the wealth with the community. And I don't find that challenging. I find that an interesting place to go forward, and I'd love to go further with that.
I think especially now that poverty is actually not changing and inequality is becoming more serious, even as economic growth is happening in many countries in Asia, social enterprises as vehicles for wealth creation and distribution, I think, need to be supported. I don't have all the answers, but I think this conversation is something that I'd like to pose to the impact investment community to actually look at as an area for innovation. And maybe this conversation can go into a process of evolving how that can happen. One area, I think, where impact investors may want to look at, even in their own partnerships, is looking at how they can engage stakeholders in the community, especially among the poor, as transformational partners. No? And as I said, it is when they are organized to actually do something about their poverty situation, so that they're not just engaged as transactional partners, as suppliers, as clients, as workers, that they start to actually get out of poverty. Because, of course, Amartya Sen talks about poverty not just as low income, but as capability deprivation. So I think if we try to look at those starting points, we can have a very rich discussion about how social innovations can happen around this area of concern.
Well, if poor folks are not involved in the formation of a term sheet, it's not going to happen. They have to be included in the exit, which means you have to transform the nature of the term sheet. Sorry.
I think it also poses another question that are there examples of transformational change happening? Are there examples where inclusion, localizing inclusion has shown where communities have moved forward? I think I heard a bit about that from Gerry as well as from Rosemary. So it would be interesting to talk about what are the experiences which need to be highlighted and which need to be probably replicated in other spaces.
Yeah, I'll just give a perspective that sometimes it's not the financial return to the community and to the enterprise is the significant thing. It's the overall impact, and it has a feature about who's in control. And if we are assisting communities to, for instance, have an interest in renewable energy developments, that can involve debt finance, it can involve community shares, and the payback period can be quite a while. But actually, the factor of the community having a stakeholding, being able to plan for that legacy and how to utilize that legacy, has been transformational in many rural communities in being one of the things that gives back a sense of self-determination. So we're interested around the world in the impact of land ownership, the impact of positive developments around mineral extraction, where instead of just giving a legacy for use of land, that actually it comes with jobs, it comes with stakeholding, and there are a whole range of examples around the world on that. So it's also encouraging. I think one of the areas that has huge potential is the social purchasing area. Partly because it doesn't cost a huge amount to implement. And instead of, in a culture of, or a situation where public services don't have that much resource to invest in social enterprise, to open up your procurement, is it easier for a city, instead of giving $2 million in a competitive fund to be divided amongst 200 social enterprises, to introduce a community benefit clause in all its procurement that gives 10% advantage to or that allocates 10% of the scoring the contractor that applies the best community benefit. Well, over a 10-year period, how many jobs is that going to create, and what value will that create? So I think we need to look cleverly. In our part of the world, we have been in recession for some time, and it's brought a focus on what can be achieved without high cost, and how transferable is it?
I think there was an example. I don't know how relevant it is, because I don't know what the financing mechanism was for this one, but it would have been a very good example for transformation in terms of land use. And this is actually in the UK itself, the Eden project. You know, yeah? The Eden project itself, if you haven't heard about it, is basically, in fact, the predecessor of the Gardens by the Bay in Singapore. So if you've been to Gardens by the Bay, then you could imagine what the Eden project looks like. So this is the only difference is that over there, this is in Cornwall, which is in UK, and this is where the social entrepreneur felt that a village in Cornwall, in fact a township in Cornwall, was dying. It used to be a mining town, and that he did not want the town to just go into poverty and ruins, and he saw the potential of a mine that has been emptied out. If I'm not saying it rightly, please add on. It's correct. Yeah? So he decided that perhaps there is something that could be done, since there is this huge tract of wasteland that nobody quite uses it. So he attempted then to put together a project to build a huge garden which could be enjoyed both by the locals, but also become, an iconic place and a tourist attraction. Lo and behold, to cut the long story short, that project became so phenomenally successful that it became the top tourist attraction in England. And what that did was to bring a lot of economic activities to the entire area, such that the people living in those areas could now offer B&Bs or tourist-related services and all sorts of activities to the visitors. And that place actually became a boom town instead. So I think that's I think he developed it to the tune of about $50 or $80 million. So it's not a small amount of money. He syndicated, I think, a series of loans and grants and social capital in all of this. And he's also, put in a lot of ideas about how that garden should also support the work of the local community, which, gets exhibited and showcased within Eden project. So, take a look at that project itself. I think it is a very good example of how, a social enterprise project on a large scale can really transform, the entire township.
Thank you so much. I'm afraid we're running out of time. So just want to highlight, key learning is if we are looking at localizing impact and prioritizing inclusion, really critical to look at lessons which we have learned, both of proactively engaging, but also probably issues of not engaging public policy. And those of you who have been engaged with microfinance industry, and if you look at what started happening in India, where there was 3 years ago, there was a growth space, and then all of a sudden, the way political momentum moves, it became a game changer, and not necessarily in a positive direction. So I leave you with food for thought, and there would be space for further discussion with the panelists. So I would like to thank all the panelists. A round of applause for all of you.